In the autumn of 1976, the Henderson family pulled into the gravel parking lot of Whispering Pines Resort in northern Minnesota. Robert Henderson, age 38, his wife Margaret, 36, their daughter Lisa, 14, and their son Tommy, 10. They checked in for what was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway. 3 days of fishing, board games, and family time away from the noise of suburban Chicago. But when Monday morning arrived and checkout time passed, the cabin manager knocked on their door. No answer. He unlocked it with his master key. The beds were made. The suitcases were gone. The rental boat was tied to the dock and used. Everything appeared normal, except for one impossible detail. Their car was still there, engine cold, keys on the front desk. But the Henderson family had vanished into thin air. For 47 years, nobody knew what happened to them, until a catastrophic flood in 2023 exposed something that should have stayed buried forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is a story that has haunted investigators, devastated community, and left one question echoing through decades. How does an entire family disappear from a locked cabin without their vehicle? The questions multiplied the deeper authorities looked. The Henderson case became one of the most perplexing disappearances in American history. No ransom demand, no bodies, no witnesses, just an abandoned vehicle and a cabin that revealed nothing. But what investigators found in 2023 changed everything. And what it revealed about human nature, about trust, and about the secrets we keep will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this case. To understand what happened at Whispering Pines, you have to understand who the Hendersons were. Robert Henderson was an accountant at a manufacturing firm in Chicago. Colleagues described him as meticulous, quiet, a man who lived by routines and spreadsheets. He coached Tommy's little league team on weekends and never missed a parent-teacher conference. Margaret Henderson was a substitute teacher at the local elementary school. Friends remember her as warm and nurturing, always the first to volunteer for school fundraisers, always with homemade cookies for neighborhood gatherings. Lisa, their 14-year-old daughter, was in her freshman year of high school. She played clarinet in the school band and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Her diary, found later in their Chicago home, was filled with typical teenage concerns: homework, crushes, arguments with her younger brother. Tommy, age 10, was obsessed with astronomy. He'd set up his telescope in the backyard every clear night, mapping constellations in a notebook he carried everywhere. His fifth-grade teacher said he could name every planet and most of the major stars by memory. They were, by every account, an ordinary American family. No financial troubles, no marital problems, no enemies anyone could identify. But in September 1976, something changed. Robert's brother, Daniel Henderson, later told investigators that Robert had seemed distracted in the weeks leading up to the trip. During a Sunday dinner at Daniel's house, Robert had stepped outside to take a phone call. When Daniel asked who it was, Robert just said, "Work stuff," and changed the subject. Margaret had confided to her best friend, Susan Palmer, that Robert had been having trouble sleeping. He'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and sit in the kitchen, staring at nothing. When Susan asked if everything was all right, Margaret assured her it was just stress from work. End of quarter reports. Nothing serious. On Friday, September 24th, 1976, the Henderson family loaded their station wagon and headed north. The drive from Chicago to Whispering Pines Resort took about 7 hours. They arrived just before sunset. The resort manager, Carl Novak, remembered them checking in. He described them as pleasant, unremarkable. Robert asked about fishing spots. Margaret inquired about the nearest grocery store. The kids seemed excited. Typical vacation energy. Carl handed them the keys to Cabin 7, a modest 2-bedroom structure about 50 yards from a main lodge. It had a small kitchenette, a stone fireplace, and a screened porch overlooking the lake. Other guests at the resort that weekend later reported seeing the Henderson family at dinner in the main lodge that Friday night. They appeared happy, normal. Lisa was reading a book. Tommy was fidgeting with a puzzle. Robert and Margaret were having a quiet conversation over coffee. Saturday morning, a fisherman named George Mitchell saw Robert and Tommy down at the dock around 7 a.m. Robert was showing Tommy how to tie a fishing lure. The boy was asking questions about the depth of the lake, whether you could see stars from a boat at night. That was the last confirmed sighting of any member of the Henderson family alive. What happened after that Saturday morning remains one of the most debated mysteries in true crime history. Sunday came and went. No one saw the Hendersons. But this wasn't unusual. The resort had 20 cabins, and guests often kept to themselves. Maybe they'd gone hiking. Maybe they'd driven into town. Monday morning. Checkout time was 11 a.m. By noon, Carl Novak noticed that Cabin 7's parking spot still had a vehicle in it. The Hendersons' brown station wagon, sitting exactly where it had been since Friday. Carl assumed they'd just lost track of time. It happened. He walked over to the cabin and knocked. No response. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Using his master key, Carl opened the door and stepped inside. The cabin was neat. Unnaturally so. The beds were made with hospital corners, the kind of precision that suggested deliberate care. The kitchenette was clean, dishes washed and stacked in the drying rack. The bathroom showed no signs of recent use. But the suitcases were gone. The family's personal belongings, clothes, toiletries, all vanished. Carl checked the porch. Nothing. He walked around the exterior of the cabin. No signs of disturbance. The windows were locked from the inside. Confused, Carl walked back to the main lodge and checked the reservation book. The Hendersons had paid for 3 nights, Friday through Sunday, checkout Monday morning. They hadn't extended their stay or mentioned leaving early. That's when Carl noticed something on the front desk. The Hendersons' car keys, sitting in a small basket where guests sometimes left them for safekeeping. But Carl didn't remember anyone from Cabin 7 dropping off keys. He'd been at the desk most of the weekend, except for his breaks and overnight hours when the lodge was locked and unstaffed. He went back outside and examined the station wagon more carefully. The doors were locked. He cupped his hands against the driver's side window and peered inside. Nothing unusual. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just an ordinary family vehicle. Carl unlocked it with the keys from the front desk. He popped the trunk. Empty. Completely empty. No suitcases, no fishing gear, nothing. At 2:30 p.m., Carl called the local sheriff's office. He reported a missing family and a very strange scene at Cabin 7. Sheriff Thomas Garrett arrived with Deputy Linda Walsh. They conducted a thorough search of the cabin and immediately noticed the same details Carl had. Everything clean, beds made, no signs of struggle, but personal belongings gone. They questioned other guests. Had anyone heard anything unusual over the weekend? Arguments? Screams? Vehicles leaving in the middle of the night? Nothing. One couple in Cabin 5 said they'd heard a car engine starting very early Sunday morning, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., but they couldn't say for certain it came from the Hendersons' cabin. Sound traveled strangely across the lake at night. Sheriff Garrett examined the car more closely. The gas tank was 3/4 full. The odometer reading matched what you'd expect for a trip from Chicago. There was a road map in the glove compartment with the route to Whispering Pines highlighted in yellow marker. He checked the ignition. The car started immediately, engine running smooth. So why had the family left their vehicle behind? The rental boat was still tied to the dock and used. The life jackets were stacked neatly inside it, undisturbed. By Tuesday morning, Sheriff Garrett had contacted the Chicago Police Department and the Hendersons' family members. Robert's brother Daniel drove up immediately. He walked through Cabin 7 with investigators, looking for anything that might explain what happened. Daniel noticed something odd. On the small table by the fireplace, there was a postcard. It showed a scenic view of the lake with greetings from Whispering Pines printed across the top. The postcard was blank. No message. No address. Just sitting there, as if someone had intended to write something but never did. Daniel also found Tommy's astronomy notebook. It was on a nightstand in the children's room, open to a page with drawings of constellations. Tommy never went anywhere without that notebook. He would never leave this behind. Daniel told investigators. Never. By Wednesday, the case had made local news. Chicago family missing in Minnesota. The headlines read. Tips started coming in, most of them leading nowhere. Someone claimed to have seen a family matching the description at a gas station 50 miles away, but the timing didn't match. Another caller insisted they'd seen the Hendersons boarding a bus to Canada, but that lead evaporated when the bus company confirmed no such passengers. Search and rescue teams scoured the woods around the resort. Divers searched the lake. Helicopters flew grid patterns overhead. Nothing. No bodies. No clothing. No evidence that the Henderson family had ever walked into those woods. Then, on Thursday, a discovery shifted the entire investigation. A housekeeper at the resort found something in the trash in a cabin 7 that had been overlooked during the initial search. Buried under crumpled newspaper and food wrappers was a torn photograph. When investigators pieced it together, they saw it was a family photo of the Hendersons. Recent, probably taken that summer. All 4 of them smiling in their backyard. But someone had torn it deliberately, and written on the back, in handwriting that appeared rushed and shaky, were 4 words. We had no choice. Those 4 words transformed the Henderson case from a missing persons investigation into something far more complex. The handwriting was analyzed by forensic experts. It matched samples of Margaret Henderson's writing, taken from birthday cards and grocery lists found in their Chicago home. Margaret had written those words. But what did they mean? No choice about what? Sheriff Garrett assembled a task force. Local police, state investigators, and FBI agents converged on Whispering Pines. They operated on several theories. Theory 1. The family had been abducted, forced to leave their car behind, and taken somewhere against their will. But there were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, and no ransom demand. Theory 2. The family had left voluntarily, perhaps fleeing from something or someone. The made beds and clean cabin suggested a planned departure. But why leave the car? Why take the suitcases but leave Tommy's precious notebook? Theory 3. Something had happened to the family in the cabin itself, and someone had cleaned up afterward, staging the scene to look like a voluntary departure. But forensic examination found no blood, no chemical traces, suggesting a cleaning agent had been used to hide evidence. The FBI focused on Robert Henderson's background. They audited his work files, interviewed his colleagues, checked for any signs of embezzlement, gambling debts, or criminal connections. They found nothing. Robert's life was exactly what it appeared to be. Ordinary, law-abiding, maybe even boring. They investigated Margaret next. Had she been having an affair? Planning to leave Robert? Any psychiatric history that might explain a breakdown? Again, nothing. Margaret's friends describe her as devoted to her family, happy in her marriage, with no history of mental illness or erratic behavior. But then investigators discovered something interesting in Robert's work calendar. 2 weeks before the Whispering Pines trip, Robert had taken a personal day. He hadn't told Margaret where he was going. His secretary remembered him saying it was family business, but being evasive about details. Investigators traced Robert's movements that day. Credit card receipts showed he'd driven to a small town in Wisconsin, about 90 miles from Chicago. He'd purchased gas and had lunch at a diner. But why? The Hendersons had no family in Wisconsin. No property, no obvious connections. The FBI sent agents to canvass the town, showing photos of Robert Henderson. An elderly librarian recognized him. He came in and asked to see old newspaper archives. She remembered. He was looking for articles from the 1950s, something about a resort or a lake. He spent about 3 hours going through microfilm. What was Robert researching? The librarian couldn't remember which specific newspapers he'd looked at, but she recalled he seemed focused, almost obsessive. Investigators requested the library's sign-in logs. Robert had viewed editions from the local paper dating from 1952 to 1956. They pulled the same microfilm reels Robert had examined and began searching for anything that might connect to the case. It took days, but they found something. An article from August 1953. Family of 4 missing after lake vacation. The article described how the Morrison family, parents and 2 children, had vanished while staying at a resort in northern Wisconsin. They'd checked in for a weekend getaway and simply disappeared. Their car was found in the parking lot. Their cabin showed no signs of struggle. The similarities to the Henderson case were chilling, but the Morrison case had a conclusion. 6 months after their disappearance, the bodies of the Morrison family were discovered in a remote section of the woods, about 10 miles from the resort. They died from exposure and starvation, apparently after getting lost during a hike. Why had Robert been researching this case? Was he worried about the same thing happening to his family? Had he seen the similarities and wanted to understand what went wrong for the Morrisons? Or was there something else? Something investigators were missing? Margaret's best friend, Susan Palmer, provided another piece of the puzzle during her 3rd interview with investigators. She'd remembered something Margaret had mentioned in passing about 2 months before the Whispering Pines trip. Margaret had said that Robert received a letter that upset him. When Susan asked about it, Margaret said it was from someone from a long time ago and that Robert didn't want to talk about it. Investigators searched the Henderson home top to bottom. They found no such letter. If it had existed, Robert had destroyed it or taken it with him. Meanwhile, the search around Whispering Pines continued. Teams expanded their radius to 20 miles, then 30. They dragged sections of the lake with sonar equipment. They interviewed every guest who'd been at the resort that weekend. One guest, a businessman named Richard Cole, who'd been staying in cabin 3, mentioned something he hadn't thought was important before. On Saturday evening, around 9 p.m., he'd been walking back to his cabin from a main lodge. He'd noticed a vehicle parked on the service road behind the cabins, which was unusual. The service road was supposed to be for resort maintenance only. The vehicle was a dark-colored van, maybe brown or black, hard to tell in the dim light. Richard hadn't seen anyone around it and hadn't thought much of it at the time. He assumed it belonged to resort staff. But when investigators asked Carl Novak about resort vehicles, he confirmed they only had one van and it was white. The dark van Richard saw didn't belong to Whispering Pines. The FBI issued a bulletin for any information about a dark van in the area that weekend. They got dozens of responses, but nothing concrete. By October, 6 weeks after the disappearance, the case had gone cold. The FBI scaled back their operation. Local law enforcement continued to follow leads, but they were running out of options. Daniel Henderson organized search parties of volunteers every weekend for months. They walked every trail, checked every abandoned building within 50 miles of the resort. Nothing. The Henderson family had evaporated. Christmas 1976 came and went. Tommy's empty chair at Daniel's holiday table was a devastating reminder of what had been lost. The case appeared on unsolved mystery television shows in the 1980s. America's Most Wanted featured it in 1991. Each broadcast brought new tips, new theories, new false hope. But the Henderson family remained missing. By the 2000s, the case was considered one of America's most perplexing unsolved disappearances. True crime forums debated theories endlessly. Some believed the family had been murdered. Others thought they'd assumed new identities and were living somewhere else. A few conspiracy theorists suggested alien abduction or government involvement, theories that serious investigators dismissed. Robert's brother Daniel died in 2015, never knowing what happened to his brother's family. At his funeral, his daughter told reporters that Daniel had spent 39 years hoping for answers. He'd kept every newspaper clipping, every police report, every scrap of information about the case. The mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved forever, until 2023. If you're still watching, drop a comment with your location. Let's see where everyone's tuning in from today. In April 2023, northern Minnesota experienced catastrophic flooding. Record snowmelt combined with heavy spring rains caused rivers and lakes to overflow at levels not seen in a century. Whispering Pines Resort, which had changed ownership 3 times since 1976 and was now called Lakeside Haven, was severely damaged. The lake rose 12 feet above normal levels, flooding cabins and washing away sections of the shoreline. When the waters receded in May, resort owner Jennifer Martinez walked the property with insurance adjusters, documenting the damage. That's when she noticed something odd. Behind what used to be Cabin 7, Now cabin 12 after renovations, the floodwaters had created a sinkhole about 15 feet in diameter. The earth had collapsed, revealing what appeared to be an old underground structure. Concrete walls, partially buried. Some kind of cellar or bunker. Jennifer called local authorities. Given the property's history in the Henderson case, police arrived with forensic teams. What they found changed everything. The underground structure was about 12 feet deep and roughly 20 by 30 feet in size. It had been deliberately concealed, with the entrance sealed and covered with dirt and vegetation. And inside, they found evidence that made investigators' blood run cold. For sleeping bags, deteriorated but still recognizable. Coleman brand. Same type the Hendersons had purchased before their trip, according to credit card receipts from 1976. Clothing, rotted and barely intact, but sizes consistent with 2 adults and 2 children. Personal items, a woman's wristwatch stopped at 317. A child sneaker, size appropriate for a 10-year-old boy. A clarinet reed still in its plastic case. And most significantly, human remains. For skeletons, positioned in sleeping bags, as if they'd simply laid down to rest and never woken up. DNA analysis confirmed what investigators already suspected. The remains belonged to Robert, Margaret, Lisa, and Tommy Henderson. After 47 years, the Henderson family had been found less than 100 feet from where they disappeared. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had they ended up in an underground bunker? How had no one known it was there? And most important, how did they die? Forensic analysis of the structure revealed it had been built in the early 1950s, during the Cold War era. It was a fallout shelter, one of thousands constructed across America during the nuclear paranoia of that period. Records showed that the resort's original owner, a man named Walter Grimsby, had built the shelter in 1952. It was designed to house his family in case of nuclear attack. Reinforced concrete walls, ventilation system, storage for food and water. But Walter Grimsby had sold the resort in 1958 and moved to California. The new owners either didn't know about the shelter or didn't care. When the property changed hands again in 1963, the shelter's existence was apparently forgotten. By 1976, it had been sealed and hidden for nearly 20 years, buried under accumulated dirt, vegetation, and time. So, how did the Henderson family end up inside it? The answer came from a detailed forensic examination of the bodies and the scene. There were no signs of trauma on the skeletons. No broken bones, no bullet holes, no indication of violence. But toxicology analysis of bone marrow samples revealed something unexpected. Elevated levels of carbon monoxide. The Henderson family had died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators examined the ventilation system in the shelter. It was old, deteriorated, and had been poorly maintained. The air intake vents were partially blocked by rust and debris. There was evidence that someone had tried to run a portable generator inside the shelter. Scorch marks on the concrete floor, remnants of burned fuel. Running a gas-powered generator in an enclosed space with poor ventilation was a fatal mistake. Carbon monoxide would have built up quickly, odorless and invisible, causing drowsiness, confusion, and eventually death. But this raised a critical question. Why were the Hendersons in the shelter to begin with? The answer came from items found near Robert Henderson's remains. A flashlight, corroded but still identifiable, and tucked inside his jacket pocket, protected from the elements, was a folded piece of paper. It was a letter written in fading ink on yellowed stationery. The letter was dated August 1976, 1 month before the Whispering Pines trip. It was addressed to Robert Henderson and signed by someone named William Morrison. William Morrison, the same last name as the family that had disappeared in 1953. The letter read, "Dear Robert, I know this will come as a shock after all these years. You don't know me, but I believe we share a connection through tragedy. In 1953, my family disappeared during a vacation in Wisconsin. The official story says they died of exposure in the woods. But I've learned the truth is far more complicated. My father left a journal, hidden in our old house. I found it when I was cleaning out the property after my mother's death. In it, he described finding an old bunker on resort property, exploring it with my mother and sisters. He wrote that they decided to spend a night in it, like an adventure. The ventilation system failed. They lit a camping stove for heat. By morning, they were dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. But here's what the journal revealed. My father knew about the bunker because he'd been researching the resort. He'd learned that the owner built fallout shelters not just on his own property, but on several properties he'd owned over the years. Robert, I've traced a pattern. The man who built the bunker where my family died also built one at a resort called Whispering Pines in Minnesota. I've tried to warn the current owners, tried to get authorities to seal it off, but no one takes me seriously. I'm writing to you because you've made reservations at Whispering Pines. I found this through a friend who works in travel booking. Please, do not explore any areas behind the cabins. Do not let curiosity lead you to that bunker. What happened to my family could happen to yours. If you receive this letter, please call me. We need to talk. William Morrison. A phone number was included at the bottom of the letter. Investigators tracked down William Morrison. He was 74 years old, living in Arizona, and confirmed he'd sent a letter in 1976. I never heard back from him, William told investigators, his voice heavy with old grief. I assumed he'd received my warning and decided not to go, or maybe he never got the letter at all. I never imagined. He paused, unable to continue. The timeline became clear through careful reconstruction. Robert had received William's letter in late August. It had disturbed him deeply. That's why he'd driven to Wisconsin, researching the Morrison case at the library, trying to verify William's claims. Robert had found the newspaper articles about the Morrison family. He'd learned about Walter Grimsby's fallout shelters, and he'd become convinced that William Morrison's warning was legitimate. But instead of canceling the trip to Whispering Pines, Robert had decided to investigate himself. Perhaps he thought he could find a bunker and report it to authorities. Perhaps he was curious. Perhaps he simply didn't believe the danger was real. The Hendersons arrived at Whispering Pines on Friday, September 24th, 1976. They checked in. They had dinner. Everything seemed normal. But on Saturday, Robert had gone exploring behind the cabins while Margaret and the kids were busy with other activities. He'd found a concealed entrance to the bunker, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, but accessible if you knew what to look for. Robert had told Margaret about his discovery, the torn photograph of Margaret's handwriting. We had no choice, suggested what happened next. Investigators theorized that Robert had become paranoid after finding the bunker. Maybe he'd convinced himself that something dangerous was happening at the resort. Maybe he'd misinterpreted something he'd seen or heard. Or maybe in his mind, the discovery of the bunker confirmed his worst fears, and he decided his family needed to hide. Late Saturday night or early Sunday morning, the Henderson family had taken their belongings and hidden themselves in the bunker. They'd left their car behind because Robert believed they were in danger and needed to hide completely. The postcard left behind, the clean cabin, the made beds, all were part of Robert's plan to make it appear they'd simply checked out normally and left. Inside the bunker, they'd settled in with their sleeping bags. Robert had brought a portable generator to provide power for light and possibly heat. The nights were getting cold in late September. But Robert didn't understand the danger of running a generator in an enclosed space with compromised ventilation. The carbon monoxide had built up silently while they slept. By Sunday morning, all 4 members of the Henderson family were dead. The entrance they'd used to get into the bunker had apparently collapsed or been blocked shortly after they'd entered, whether by natural settling of the earth or by their own actions to conceal themselves. They'd trapped themselves in their supposed refuge. For 47 years, the Henderson family had been buried in that Cold War relic, undiscovered because no one knew to look there. The car keys on the front desk? Investigators concluded Robert must have placed them there himself late Saturday night as part of staging their departure. The "we had no choice" note? Margaret's acknowledgement that they were following Robert's plan, even if she had doubts about it. The tragedy of the Henderson case wasn't murder or abduction. It was a series of well-intentioned but fatal mistakes, compounded by fear, misunderstanding, and terrible luck. The Henderson case was officially closed in August 2023. Cause of death: accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. The family had died in 1976, not knowing that no danger threatened them, that the bunker they'd chosen for protection had become their tomb. But there was one more discovery that changed the way investigators understood the case. Among the items found in the bunker was Tommy Henderson's astronomy notebook, the same notebook his Uncle Daniel had noticed was missing from Cabin 7. Tommy had brought it into the bunker with him, and on the final pages, investigators found entries that hadn't been there before. The entries were dated Sunday, September 26, 1976. Tommy had written them inside the bunker. "Dad says we have to stay quiet down here. He says there are bad men at the resort, and we need to hide until they leave. It's cold and dark, but Dad says the generator will keep us warm. Lisa is scared. She keeps asking when we can go home. Mom told her to be brave. I try to look at stars through the air vent, but I can't see any. Dad says we'll see stars again soon. I'm getting tired. The air smells funny. Dad says it's just the generator. He says to go to sleep, and when we wake up, everything will be better." That was the last entry. Tommy Henderson fell asleep next to his family, believing his father's promise that everything would be better when he woke up. He never woke up. None of them did. William Morrison, the man who tried to warn Robert Henderson, was devastated when he learned what happened. "I should have tried harder," he told reporters through tears. "I should have called him. I should have contacted the resort directly. I sent one letter, and I thought that was enough." But it wasn't. It wasn't enough. But investigators found no fault with William Morrison. He'd done what he could with the information he had. The tragedy wasn't his responsibility. It was a confluence of circumstances. Robert's paranoia, the hidden bunker, the failing ventilation system, the fateful decision to use a generator in an enclosed space. Daniel Henderson's daughter, Patricia, now 62 years old, flew to Minnesota to claim her family's remains. "For 47 years, we didn't know," she said at a press conference. "We imagined every possible scenario. Kidnapping, murder, starting over somewhere else. We never imagined this, that they were so close the whole time, that they died trying to protect themselves from a danger that didn't exist." The Henderson family was finally laid to rest in Chicago in September 2023, exactly 47 years after their disappearance. The bunker at what is now Lakeside Haven Resort was filled in and sealed permanently. A small memorial plaque was installed near the site, but the story didn't end there. Following the Henderson discovery, authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into other properties owned or developed by Walter Grimsby, the man who built the fallout shelters. They identified 14 other locations across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan where Grimsby had built similar structures between 1951 and 1957. Search teams were dispatched to each location. Ground-penetrating radar was used to locate the buried bunkers. At 3 of the locations, they found more remains. In Wisconsin, they discovered the bodies of a couple who disappeared in 1962. In Michigan, a solo hiker who'd vanished in 1969. And in another Minnesota location, a family of 3 who'd gone missing in 1971. None of these deaths were homicides. All were tragic accidents. People who discovered the hidden bunkers, explored them, and been trapped or poisoned by carbon monoxide from heating devices or generators. The total victim count connected to Walter Grimsby's fallout shelters reached 17 people across 5 decades. Walter Grimsby himself had died in 1983, never knowing that his Cold War paranoia and hidden bunkers would become death traps for innocent people. His children, now elderly, expressed horror and remorse when contacted by investigators. "Our father built those shelters believing he was protecting us from nuclear war. He never intended them to harm anyone. We had no idea they still existed or that anyone had found them. If we had known, we would have had them sealed decades ago." The case prompted a nationwide effort to locate and seal abandoned Cold War-era fallout shelters on private and public property. Thousands were identified and made safe. For the families who'd spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones, the answers brought a painful mixture of closure and fresh grief. "At least now we know," one daughter said at her father's reburial. "At least now we can say goodbye. The Henderson case reminds us that sometimes the truth is stranger and sadder than any theory we could imagine. A family didn't die because of evil or violence. They died because a father tried to protect them from a danger that existed only in his worried mind, using a shelter that had been forgotten by time. Robert Henderson made a choice based on fear and incomplete information. It cost him and his family everything, but he never knew. In his final moments, he likely believed he was keeping them safe. The question we're left with is this: how many other hidden places exist? How many forgotten structures from paranoid eras still wait beneath the earth, ready to trap the curious or the desperate? And how many mysteries, like the Henderson case, have answers hiding in plain sight, waiting for time and chance to reveal them? If you want to hear about more cases like this, there's a video on the screen now about another family that disappeared under impossible circumstances. The truth in that one will shock you even more. And if this story affected you the way it affected me, hit that like button and share this video. These families deserve to be remembered. I'm reading every comment. So let me know what you think happened. Would you have made the same choice Robert did? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.